welcome to this second appointment of the Artificial Intelligence and Mathematics seminars. It's a pleasure to have with us Dario Pasquini. Dario Pasquini received his PhD from the Department of Computer Science of Sapienza University in Rome in 2021, while being an associated EPFL Cnr under the supervision of Massimo Bernaschi. Currently, he is a postdoctoral researcher at EPFL, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, working in the Security and Privacy Engineering Laboratory led by Carmela Troncuso. Dario's research has a twofold mission. Firstly, he aims to investigate and quantify the potential security and privacy risks posed by machine learning systems on users. Secondly, he aims to enhance security and privacy technologies by machine learning techniques. Research works led by Dario have been accepted at the most prestigious venues in computer security, such as IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy, Usenix Security Symposium, and the ACM Conference on Computer and Communication Security. Okay, thank you, Dario, to be with us, and you can start.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and thanks for a nice introduction. So I guess we can start. Yes, today I'm going to talk about privacy-preserving collaborative machine learning. And so I had a look to the previous talks of this cycle of seminars, and I think this is going to be the most peculiar talk, because the subject here is not machine learning per se, but we are going to talk about privacy and security in machine learning. For this purpose, I will try to be as general as possible. I'm not going to require prior knowledge on the topic, just some ML basics. But the important thing is that we'll touch many topics very briefly, just to give you an idea of this field. Now, the objective of the talk instead is making clear what collaborative machine learning is and what it's about, and what, and if any, level of privacy you should expect from it. But before that, let's start by introducing the main topic. So essentially, there is a problem we want to solve, and the problem encompasses a set of users. Those users can be organizations like hospitals. And the point is that every user, every organization has a data set of local data, and they would like to use this data to train a machine learning model. Now, the problem is that local data may be not enough to train a machine learning model, or just not enough representative. Simply it's not enough to train a single local model for each user. And the idea here is like combine these small local training sets in such a way that those users, those organizations can converge to a single shared machine learning model using all their data. Now, the naive solution, the legacy solution, is something that we can call centralized learning. And the idea is simple. All the users, all the hospitals send their data to a central entity, and this central entity shuffle the data and perform the training of the machine learning model in the standard fashion. After the training, simply the training machine learning model is sent back to the parties that provide the data. Now, this is something that often you cannot do. The reason is trivial. Essentially, valuable data that you may want to use to train a machine learning model very often is sensitive. Those can be like the text you write on your phone, and so you should not share it, even if you see that there's nothing wrong with that. But sharing data can be completely impossible because of regulations like GDPR or EPA. And for instance, if you are an hospital, you cannot share the data of your patients with other hospitals by law. And this brings to the topic of the talk, and is something that is called collaborative machine learning. CML for short. And the idea here is we want to enable those users to train a shared machine learning model, but we achieve that in such a way that the local data, the private data that each user has, never leaves their devices. And the idea is we train this shared machine learning model, data stay local. The only thing we share is something that we define as a proxy signals of the data, and that should preserve the privacy of the data and the users involved. And essentially, collaborative machine learning is a family of protocols that try to solve this problem. Oh, okay, sorry. And by far, the most famous collaborative machine learning protocol is something called Federated Learning. It has been introduced around 2016 by Google. And if you are not in the field, it's very hard for me to describe the impact that this protocol had on the community. Everyone wants to use it. Everyone wants to do collaborative machine learning. And there is a huge interest in both academia and industry. Literally, we have dozens of papers, new papers about the topic every week. Machine learning conferences, security conferences have one or more tracks dedicated to this topic. And this is quite fun because essentially the protocol is very simple. So again, we have a set of users that are represented by these smartphones here, but we have an additional party that is called the parameter server. The idea here is that the parameter server is a central entity that helps the users to train the machine learning models. So it orchestrates the training process. Now, we have three main phases for this protocol. The first phase is just parameters distribution. So essentially the server as an internal model, in this case represented by theta. This is the machine learning model, typically a neural network. And what the server does is distributes these parameters to all the users that are participating to that round of FL. In the second phase, what the users do is use the local data that they have on the device, plus the weights of the neural networks, the neural network that they received from the server, and they perform some local training iterations. That is simply applying one or more iteration of stochastic gradient descent, like in a standard machine learning model. In a standard neural network model. And now it's here that the magic happens. The user computes the optimization, so they end up with a gradient. That is the gradient of the weights of the loss function with respect to the weights of the neural network. And instead of sending the data to the server, they simply send this gradient. Now the server receives the gradient and it aggregates them, meaning you compute the average of the gradients produced by the users and apply it on the current state of the model. It performs an optimization step in its an iterative process and obtain the parameters for the new model of the next round. And this process repeats until some kind of convergence is met. Typically, it's the server that decides that the model is ready. Now, as I said, the main point we want to achieve with this protocol is privacy. And FL is private because model updates, in this case, gradient produced from one or more iteration of stochastic gradient descent, is not data. It's just gradient, and because the real data remains safely stored on the device, this is never shared. So the data, the privacy of data is preserved, and this is the main idea behind EPFL. And the community is loving it. Everyone is using it. This EPFL allows communities outside the computer science to experiment with the machine learning, achieve very good results. But here starts the problem. So if you see EPFL from a security perspective, if you have cryptographic security definition in mind, the fact that the fundamental rule, the fundamental claim that EPFL is secure because the gradient is not data, is something that does not compile. So at the end of the day, gradient is just a smooth function of the input data. And from a formal security perspective, sending data or sending gradient is the same thing. And this is met also in practice. So again, let's assume that the server is the attacker in the scheme, and the server receiving the gradient wants to recover the data that has been used to compute the gradient, so breach the privacy preserving property of the protocol. The server can do it. So it can perform an attack called gradient inversion attack. And the idea is that we optimize synthetic data such that the gradient generated by the synthetic data on the weights of the neural network that are known is similar to the one received from the client. And if we perform this optimization after a certain number of iterations, in certain cases, we are able to recover the private data from the gradient that is sent to the server. Now, this is the lucky case when the server is semi-honest. So this is security terminology. And semi-honest means that the attacker, yes, wants to breach the privacy of the other user in the system, but is also a little bit honest in the sense that it doesn't deviate from the correct execution of the protocol. So if the server is requested to aggregate the values and apply the model update to the current parameters, the server does it. Now, things get messy when we consider a malicious server. A malicious server is an attacker that, yes, wants to breach the privacy of users, but now the server can deviate from an honest execution of the protocol. In EPFL, when the server is malicious, can perform even more powerful attacks that we can call malicious gradient inversion. And I'm not gonna cover details here, but the main intuition is that we have the server. The server, instead of sending the right parameters to the users in the system, the server creates a set of adversarially maliciously crafted parameters and distributes those to the users. Now, those adversarial parameters are created in such a way that essentially when the user computes the gradient using those parameters, the resulting gradient memorizes the input that has been used to compute the gradient. And the main idea is exploiting the linear layers at the end of the neural network to store this information. And so when the server is malicious and provides these parameters to the users, essentially we are able to recover exact copies of some of the data that has been used to compute the gradient. And again, these are exact copies, verbatim copies. And this means that essentially the server, if the server wants, can completely breach the privacy-preserving property of the protocol. So until now, the moral is, despite EPFL is believed to be a privacy-preserving mechanism, actually this does not provide any concrete form of protection. Now, there is another huge field, subfield, let's say, that aims to improve the security offered by EPFL, by this protocol. Indeed, while some people still believe that this protocol is privacy preserving, the security community is pushing to try to add defenses mechanisms to improve the robustness and privacy offered by the protocol. And in the next slides, I'm gonna talk about that. In particular, I'm gonna talk about my research. And indeed, my research is about answering this simple question: does this stuff actually make CML more private? But as you're going to see, typically this is not the case. So let's start talking about secure aggregation. This probably is the first kind of privacy enhanced technique that has been combined with EPFL, because yes, this has been proposed by Google in 2017, and it exploits a very nice, probably the only nice property of EPFL is that this property tells you that now, because the server only needs to compute the aggregate of the individual gradients produced by users, the server does not need to access the individual gradients. So if the server receives only the sum of these values, this is enough to implement the functionality we want to implement. So the idea here from the guys from Google is to combine EPFL with a secure multi-party computation protocol. And in particular, they implement under MPC only the part where the clients compute the sum of the gradients. So instead of sending the gradients, the individual gradients to the server, now the clients talk with each other, perform the multi-party computation protocol, and the server gets only the sum. And in practice, because the server gets only the sum, this makes very hard to perform the attacks we described in the previous slides, because essentially I'm compressing a lot of information in a single bucket. And so while this does not give you formal guarantees of privacy, still it prevents almost all the attacks that we have against EPFL. Now, this protocol has been proven to be secure against an arbitrary malicious server, meaning in the paper they show that even if the server is malicious, so it can do whatever the server wants, still no information is leaked. So the server only learns the sum of the gradients, nothing more. And this also considering the server that is colluding with a subset of users. Now, my research was about investigating if this was actually true. And unfortunately, the answer here is no. While there is nothing wrong with the secure aggregation protocol per se, it's a simple multi-party computation protocol. We start having problems when we combine this simple protocol with federated learning. So, which is its main application. So again, we use secure aggregation to prevent the server from accessing the individual model updates, and the output of the secure aggregation is a function of the gradients that the users have produced during a round of the protocol. But if you think about it, the gradient is a function of two things. One element are the weights, and the other element are the local data of users. But if you remember, when I introduced the EPFL protocol, we have a problem here because it's the server that controls the parameters that is one of the components that the user uses to compute the gradient. So if you follow the chain, we have that we want that the output of the segregation does not leak anything to the server, but we have that the server, that is the attacker in the scheme, controls the parameters of the networks, and so has an indirect influence on the gradient, and the gradient is the input for the segregation. And from the security perspective, this is not a good thing. Let me show you why. So this is a very simple attack that we propose in the paper, and we call it gradient suppression. And the idea here is that the server selects a target user among the pool of users participating to the protocol, and all the other users in the system are considered non-target. And now the user wants to recover the gradient of this specific user, even if secure aggregation is in place. In order to run the attack, the server does something that we call modeling consistency. That is, it distributes different parameters to different users. In particular, the server gives the honest parameters, the parameters that it would have provided in the honest execution to the target user, while it sends a set of maliciously crafted parameters to all the other users. Now, the trick is that the maliciously crafted parameters are created in such a way that no matter what the user does, if the user computes the gradient using these parameters, the gradient is always going to be 0 everywhere. Essentially, the idea is that we are providing the parameters that make the neural network a custom function, and the derivatives of a custom function is always 0. So they compute the gradients, then perform a secure aggregation on protocol, and this is what happens because all non-target users provided zero gradient. The sum of all the gradients will be only the gradient provided by the target user, leaking the gradient of the target user to the server. Now, receiving this gradient, the server can perform gradient inversion attacks and breach the privacy of the user, even if secure aggregation in place. Now, this attack is simple, but has very nice properties. It works even with millions of users. That usually is the case in real-world application across device FL. It works for any kind of task, any kind of neural network, and does not require any auxiliary information on users. However, it can be trivially detected by non-target users because, in theory, you should not be able to generate zero gradient. And so in the paper, we introduce a more sophisticated attack that we call canary gradient attack that exploits the same mechanism, but to perform inference attacks on users instead of data reconstruction. Now, all the attacks I've shown you until now were executed by the server. So it's easy to see how the server is a privacy bottleneck. So the server is this super node that has a very tight control on the learning process, on what the users do. So a natural solution to try to improve the privacy of these kind of protocols, of FL protocols, is to get rid of the server. And this is what many researchers proposed. And there are many papers that propose this idea. And for now, we call it decentralized machine learning. But the point here is taking FL, we remove the server, and now users, instead of communicating through the server, they use peer-to-peer communication to train the machine learning model in a collaborative fashion. let's go over the protocol very quickly. So there are many different kinds of protocol, but in general, they share all the same steps. That is what we are gonna cover now. So we start, and essentially every user picks a set of neighbors. It's not clear how, but imagine that you are this node, theta 0, and you want to connect to theta 3 and theta 2. And then after that, every user found a set of neighbors we communicate with. They start executing this protocol simultaneously. And it's very similar to FL, but in this case, we start and we perform a first local training iteration. So every user has a set of parameters that remains local, and they have a local data set and try to start by optimizing their local view of the parameters using a stochastic descent iteration. And they obtain an updated local model that we call the T plus 1/2. And in the second phase, there is the communication part where every user sends this updated model to the neighbors while receiving the model updates produced by neighbors. So at this point, every user collected the model updates generated by neighbors, and they are ready to update the local state. And to do that, they simply, like the server before, they compute an aggregation of these values. In this case, it's an average, and this is those are the parameters for the next round of the protocol. And again, the protocol continues until a certain condition is met. Probably this you can see this as a gossip protocol, where it's essentially information is slowly propagated through nodes instead of having a central server that acts like a repository for the model. Now, in another paper, we did the same thing we had to do with secure aggregation. So I investigate if this protocol, again, offers the properties that the protocol claimed to offer. So in this case, achieving privacy through the remotion of the server. Let me start from the end here. The answer is no. Indeed, in the paper, we show some fundamental results, and we show that essentially, no matter the chosen topologies, and you don't care how users connect among them, decentralized learning will always offer less security and privacy than equivalent setup for FL. And I'm not going to give you all details here. Sorry. That's an intuition, but the point is that the gossip propagation process used to learn a model induces a very low generalization. So that means that the parameters of the local parameters of all the nodes overfit quite fast. So they retain more information about the local data, and that is quite bad for privacy. And another decisive factor is that enabling users to access multiple model updates simultaneously and enlarge the attack surface. And based on this second point, we were able to show that essentially decentralized learning introduces a security paradox that tells you that, so we use decentralized learning in order to remove the server from the equation, but now because how decentralized learning has been implemented, every user in the system can reach the same adversarial capabilities of a server in FL. So every user now can perform the same attacks that EPFL server could perform in Federated Learning, nullifying the aim of the protocol. So in the next slides, I'm gonna show you this. So again, we talked about this before. Let's start with gradient diversion attacks. We consider semi-honest attacker for now. And just to refresh your memory, so we have the attacker here, in this case is node 0, and we have a victim that is the node 2. And now during the training, the target victim sends a model update to the attacker, and the attacker wants to extract the gradient from this model update in order to invert it and recover, performing inference, recover the data that has been used to compute the gradient, so breaching the privacy of the user. Now, actually, this seems quite hard to achieve in decentralized learning. In the general case, you cannot do it. So an attacker cannot recover the gradient of a user. But if the attacker is smarter, can do something, can actually achieve it. So remember that the model update that the victim sends to the target looks something like this. So essentially, is the current parameters of the model optimized with a single iteration of stochastic gradient descent. Now, in theory, if the attacker would know the parameter of the target at the current time step, we can the attacker could just subtract this from the received model update and isolate the gradient and suffer from the attack. However, the problem here is that those parameters are a function of the neighbors of the victim. In this very specific case, we have that the attacker knows 2/3 components of this aggregation here. This is the model update that the attacker sent to the victim at the previous round, while the last element is the model update that the victim sent to the attacker at the previous round. The only missing component in this is here, that is the model update that the node 1 sent to the victim at the previous round. Now, if the attacker is smart enough, one thing the attacker can do is just to connect to this node here. So getting access to this model updates, and now the attacker knows everything, can recompute the parameter of the user, remove it from the model update, and recover the gradient. Once recovered the gradient, the attacker can perform gradient inversion attacks and breach the privacy of the user, as a server in EPFL will do. More generally, the idea here is that we show that a decentralized attacker, a decentralized user, can become as powerful as a parameter server in EPFL every time we have that the set of neighbors of the victim is a subset of the neighbors of the attacker. Every time this condition is met, essentially the attacker has the same power that a server would have in EPFL. And this is true also for the malicious setting. So I will show you that a decentralized user can perform malicious gradient inversion. So for refreshing your memory, in malicious gradient inversion, the attacker must control the parameters that the victim uses to compute the gradient. And however, in decentralized learning setting, this seems impossible, because if you remember the protocol, essentially when the victim, when a user computes its local model, every neighbor controls only a tiny portion of the final aggregate value. In this case, the attacker controls only 1/3 of the model parameters that the target will have after the aggregation. So it's very hard for the attacker to control the state of the victim and so on for malicious gradient inversion attacks. However, in the paper, we show an attack that actually can do it. We call the state override attack. And it works like this. So in the first phase of the attack, the attacker, the node 0, actually, before sending the update to the neighbors, waits to receive all the model updates produced by the neighbors. Then what it does is it forges the model update to send to the victim user. And in assembling this model, essentially, it computes the sum of the model updates produced by the neighbors of the target victim. In this case, is the model update of the victim itself and the local and the model update of node 1. It computes the sum, it negates it. And plus, it adds a payload. And essentially, this is the set of parameters that the attacker wants the target user to have after the attack. Now, after that the adversarial parameters has been crafted, the server sends these parameters to the victim, and the victim, following the honest execution, computes the aggregation using these parameters. Now, for the way those parameters, this model update has been created, when the target performs the aggregation, we have something like this, where the red part is the model update produced by the attacker. If we expand it, we see that the target sent this component here, but now these two parts canceled out, and the only remaining part is the payload that the attacker inserted in the model update. So essentially, the attacker has been able to reset the state of the local parameters of the victim and replace it with an arbitrary payload. Now, if you recall about what I said about malicious gradient inversion, the only thing that the attacker needs to do is to replace the payload with the trap weights used to perform malicious gradient inversion. And essentially, at the next iteration, when the attacker receives the gradient generated by the target user, it can extract copies of some of the elements that has been used to compute the gradient, breaching the privacy as a Federated Learning would do. A server in Federated Learning would do. So again, with these two attacks, we've shown that essentially a decentralized user can do what a federated server can do. However, you have two universes. When you're using EPFL, the only attacker capable of performing these critical attacks is the server, which is well-defined and often orchestrated by a prominent organization like Google. While in DL, in decentralized learning, now every user that you have around you can be as strong as a federated server, but in this case, you can have multiple attackers, and probably those attackers are going to be anonymous. So if I have to pick, I prefer to give my information to EPFL. At least in this case, we have just a well-defined enemy. Now, in theory, I would talk about another paper, another protocol called split learning. Split learning is a variation of federated learning that among many things, was aiming to improve the privacy of the protocol, but it fails. And the idea here is that instead of sending gradients among users, now users share activation of regional networks with the server. However, this introduces even more attacks, allows the server to perform even more accurate negotiation attacks. If you are interested about the topic, check out our paper. But this brings us to the conclusion. So what we should have learned from this presentation is that collaborative machine learning is a privacy-preserving technique, is something that has been mistakenly normalized by the scientific community. Despite the huge interest and research throughput, the reality is that current protocols are not a solution for your privacy issues, but still the community is pushing for them and using them also in real application. Another thing is that, as we know in security, that trying to patch something that is inherently insecure very often does not bring anywhere. This is what I try to show you with the attacks. So even if you try to patch the protocol, if this protocol is slow, it's very hard to achieve privacy. And the final message is the only suitable direction we have to solve collaborative machine learning is to embrace a format security definitions. The ideal one would be cryptography, end-to-end cryptography, not like segregation where only a part of the system is encrypted. This would provide the best level of security, or in the worst case, we rely on a weaker form of privacy, such as differential privacy. But again, this offers less privacy, and it requires also some assumptions that can are daily met in the EPFL setting. But the most important thing is that, yes, we need to use embrace formal security definitions, but we also need to accept that these techniques comes with a massive efficiency and utility cost. There is nothing that we can do about it. And the sad reality is that everything outside the spectrum, everything outside the spectrum of formal security definitions can offer only a false sense of security to the community. What's next? So the gold standard for privacy in EPFL is differential privacy. That is another technique, but as anticipated before, this required assumptions on the data distribution used to compute the model updates, and very often, depending on the kind of differential privacy used, those assumptions may not be met, and this opens to further attacks that we can run against the protocol. This concludes the talk, and if you have questions, I'm here for them.
Okay, thanks, Dario. So there is one question that I want to show by Daniela De Canditis. Visto che serve solo la somma dei gradienti, I translated. So given that only the gradient sum is needed, each server could add its own contribution to the sum without transferring any single admin?
Not sure.
Please reply in English. So, yeah.
But essentially, there is a single server. Maybe you were talking about the users. But I'm not sure what you mean.
Maybe she was referring to the to other clients, let's say. Actually, this is one question I had to. So, does your research result prove that even if we have more than one server, the situation does not get any better?
In theory, the attack works against the ideal functionality of segregation. So no matter what you do, the attack would work. Now the situation is different when, yes, you have two servers and you are assuming like honest majority. So the two servers are not colluding together. In that case, yes, because essentially you are making the server, you are preventing the server from behaving maliciously. So if the server is honest but curious, yes, you cannot run the attack because this is an active attack.
Another question that comes to my mind: what about in the distributed, decentralized learning scenario? What about fixing a specific topology that prevents the attacker from accessing? I don't know if you already answered this question. From accessing the missing data they misses. So it's in order
Yeah,
to force.
that's a good point. Yes, that's a good point. But again, it's a problem because who chooses it? Who enforces it? Because if you are using like a central entity to enforce it, you are falling back to FL. And if that entity is malicious, essentially it can shape the network in such a way that you can still perform the attack.
Okay, so if you do manage to do it, it would eventually. I mean, if you limit the amount of neighbors that one node is giving its data to, it's somehow self-limiting. No, you cannot, as a node, you cannot give your data to more than k nodes.
Yes, but actually there are more attacks you can do. So the point is, we should interpret that actually DL can reach the same privacy guarantees, quote unquote guarantees of FL, if and if everyone is connected to everyone. So if we are imposing a sparse combination topology, yes, you are preventing this kind of attack, but essentially you are reducing the generalization of users, meaning that those models here are going to overfit more quickly. And when you share your state with your neighbors, you are going to leak more information.
Okay. There's another question, but Anis, what do you think the approach towards privacy and fidelity should be towards synthetic datasets?
What do you think?
What do you think? I think there's a comma there, or a question mark.
Sure. That is another hot topic. So I'm not an expert on it, but essentially one of my colleagues is working on it, and there is not a good take. She doesn't have a good take on synthetic data. So in one of her papers, essentially, she showed that there is not a good trade-off between synthetic data, the utility that synthetic data can give you, and privacy. So if the synthetic data is private, the data is not give you information. So if you train a machine learning model on synthetic data, you are not gonna get good utility. And so it doesn't seem a good direction, like to solve these kind of problems. But again, I'm not an expert. But yes.
One more question. This is maybe a stupid one. I mean, in FL, the attacks, this kind of attacks are only possible by the server. Is there any attack another client can perform, given the? I mean,
Yes.
it's less powerful.
Yes, that's the point. that is another problem with EPFL, because if you think about it, so as I said, the point of this collaborative machine learning is preventing this setting, centralized learning, where essentially by sending the gradient, I'm not sending the data. But in certain cases, that is not the case. I show you that you can perform malicious gradient inversion and recover exact copies. But now, in the collaborative machine learning setting, you are giving even more power to users, because now the users can manipulate the training process and push the model to memorize more information about your data. So yes, users in EPFL can perform attacks. They are not powerful as the attacks that the server can execute, but still in EPFL you are introducing more attack surface because you are enabling the users to run attacks. While in centralized learning, they can simply send the data and their part finishes there. But for instance, users can run membership inference attacks. So if a certain training point has been used to train the model, yeah, something like this. There is no proof that you can run reconstruction attacks, but that depends on the setting.
So basically, the overall result you're showing is that machine learning in a collaborative way, let's say it's overkill to solve the privacy issues with the present approaches, because that would mean that the efficiency that the useless it renders it useless from the point of view of the performance.
No, really.
Well,
so
it's with differential privacy, and if you introduce privacy, yes, if you introduce privacy issues from the beginning, basically you limit the efficiency of present approaches.
Yeah, but the main point is that this kind of solutions in the middle, where it's enough to send the gradient instead of the data, don't provide you with the privacy you want, even if intuitively they seem to. But all the presentation was about now actually they don't. And if you really want to solve the problem, the only thing you can do is using differential privacy or use cryptography, and everything outside that does not give you formal guarantees is just there to provide a false sense of security that maybe I cannot break today, but tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, I can do it with new attacks.
Okay, perfect. I think it's important to know that the issue is present today, and it will be in the future. Well, thanks. I think there are no. Okay, maybe there is another question. One last question, very last question. What about model accuracy comparing the centralized standard learning and federated learning? By Gianluca.
Depends what you mean. So of course, in centralized learning, the real centralized learning, the one we are looking at is represented in the slide, where users send the data to the server, is always going to have better accuracy than what you will achieve with EPFL. And I mean, by definition, you have all the data, you can do whatever you want. And even if there is a federated learning protocol that achieves better accuracy, better utility, you can still simulate it with the central approach. But I think you were referring to, no, it's centralized. Now the situation is different when centralized learning is referred to the fact that every user trains the model using the local data. Now, because the local data may be not enough, in that case, yes, FL improves accuracy because you are using more data.
Okay, thanks again, the speaker, and we'll leave you to the next meetings from the general seminars Italia, and if you follow the link to the main AIM site, you will have the news on upcoming seminars. Thanks again, the speaker, and see you soon.